Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
After years of public service, many federal employees walk out the door with hard-earned insights about what works and what doesn't in government. But those lessons rarely make it back to Congress. Departure Dialogues is a new project that gives departing civil servants a safe, nonpartisan way to share their wisdom and help fix the system they've spent years trying to make work. Here to fill us in on the details is Managing Director of PopVox Foundation, Ann Meeker. Ann, thanks so much for joining me. It's great to have you back.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
I am excited to hear more about this new PopVox project called the Departure Dialogue. So tell us kind of what it is and how it fits in the space.
Yes, absolutely. We are so excited to have this launched and live in the world. So I will say this is a collaborative project. So it is not just our team at PopVox Foundation, but working with a wonderful group of other organizations, including the Niskanen Center, Civil Service Strong, Partnership for Public Service, and Foundation for American Innovation. And where this all came from was actually some conversations that we had last year, and I know many folks have had similar ones, talking to federal employees and talking to congressional staff about just where are the disconnects between the legislative branch and the executive branch. And what we always hear is that, hey, Congress, in its infinite wisdom and sometimes with the best of intentions, can actually place these statutory barriers to efficiency and effective programmatic work in the pathway of agencies. And then process of actually getting that information of saying, hey, Congress, bless your heart, but there is an outdated requirement that I have to fax this specific type of information that adds time, that adds workload, that adds money. Getting that kind of granular issue over and across the legislative affairs bottleneck to Congress itself is incredibly hard. Legislative affairs only has so much time with committees, only has so much time with members. They're focused on the big priorities. So sometimes that small stuff really falls through the cracks. But rank and file federal employees aren't always empowered to go talk to Congress. So we really kind of, in this crazy year where we're seeing so many federal employees departing federal service voluntarily or involuntarily, we were all talking and realized there might be an incredible opportunity here where we can talk to some of these folks and say, hey, what is the thing that you always wished you could get through that legislative affairs bottleneck? What do you want Congress to know about how it is making your job or is making your former job harder? And then the idea is that hopefully we'll be able to collect some of these insights and then do our part to throw them over the wall to Congress, to get them to the right place where they need to go and give Congress that roadmap of, hey, where do we go from here? How do we create more effective, efficient federal agencies and programs?
This is not just an oral history project where I get to come in and tell you my life story. You're really looking for specific policy observations or operational, as you say, bottlenecks.
Yes, exactly. And I will say there is a phenomenal group of organizations also operating in this space, many of whom are actually doing more oral history work, focusing on federal civil service storytelling, really kind of getting broad and getting long in the stories that they're asking federal employees to tell. And we are differentiated from that. So if you are a departing federal employee and you're like, hey, my life story is my life story, I don't really want to share this, but I really have to tell you that this report to Congress that Congress has asked for that I know no one reads is a problem. We want to be the home for that kind of information.
What kind of folks are you looking to have participate? GS-14s and 15 managers, doers at the lower levels, white collar, blue collar? What are you thinking?
Sure, we are open to everybody. Civil service, political appointee, contractor. If you have worked for the federal government and you have had one of those moments at some point, they're like, hey, dear Congress, you should know about this and I can't figure out the way to tell you. We hope that you'll come talk to us at Departure Dialogues.
And you have sort of a sense of urgency about this. You want people to do it now, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're aware that this is a limited window, that the folks who are departing federal service, the folks who have already processed off, or the many, many, many people who are leaving or whose employment formally terminates at the end of September, they're heading to their next careers. They're heading to their next placement, their next employment. So we really are aware that we kind of have this limited window when we can really reach folks and they might have, that fresh insight, that fresh experience, and then also a limited window for this Congress as well.
Tell us a little bit about how your data collection process works. If someone wants to participate and tell you their story, what should they expect in terms of interaction?
Sure. So I will say the sub goal here, the meta level, is that we're also hoping that this is a really good experiment to show Congress how it is possible to do this kind of large scale qualitative data collection of proactive, hey, this is the information that we want to get, and here's how we can reach out to a broad a broad number of people, broad spectrum of people, without completely tying up Congress's limited capacity in processing that information. So it's completely self-service. So we have two options. We've worked with an oral history platform called Their Story to allow folks to kind of do a guided self-interview. So you'd log onto the platform, and then the platform walks you through our 9 questions. And we also have a written version as well. If folks don't want to do the video, they don't want to record themselves, but we can take those insights in a form as well. And I will say we offer levels of anonymity. We understand some of this information is sensitive, and we are not looking for, criminal malfeasance, whistleblower stuff. We'd love to direct folks with that kind of information to the proper channels. But this is still sensitive information. So we do offer folks participating the chance to remain anonymous if they'd like.
I'm speaking with Ann Meeker. She's managing director of the PopVox Foundation. All right, Ann, you mentioned this large-scale quantitative data collection. That is really hard information to process. What happens on the back end? How will PopVox turn this into something that lawmakers can use?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that is our other partner for this project that we're really excited to work with, is a team called the AI Objectives Institute, who run a product called Talk to the City. And what Talk to the City does is it uses AI, uses machine learning sentiment analysis to take a body of video interviews and then use sentiment analysis to pull them into an interactive archive. So what that archive shows you is kind of the top takeaways from that body of videos. And then you can drill down under those top line takeaways into individual arguments. And then looking at an individual argument, it'll take you back to the moment in the video archive where someone said that thing. So we're really making it clear, we are not in any way trying to put our thumb on the scale for how to interpret some of these videos. We are trying to just present this in a way that is as easy to use as possible for Congress, so that anyone for any political background, either party, whichever committee is interested in taking forward some of these ideas, some of these insights, can use this information to draw that roadmap.
And how do you make sure that the AI comes at this from an objective, unbiased perspective?
Sure. So that's a lot of where our coalition partners come in. We have folks in that group of organizations from both sides of the aisle and from in kind of legislative and executive branch perspectives as well. So we are going to be working with them on that analysis to kind of double check what's coming out of that AI tool and make sure that it is unbiased, it is true to what these employees former federal employees are telling us, and that it is also presented in a way that's as easy as possible for Congress to actually make use of.
Have you heard from members of Congress about what they might be interested in related to this project? Are there particular policy issues? Are there particular committees, particular members that are sitting on pins and needles waiting for this information?
I hope they are. I will say there's this growing group within Congress of folks who are really interested in state capacity as the big headline concept of really trying to understand how do we write legislation that is actually implementable? So that's Congress actually starting to sit up and take some responsibility for the places where it has inadvertently created these problems. We're seeing a growing kind of coalition and growing interest among a lot of members across a bunch of different issue areas, committees, agency portfolios, saying, hey, this kind of administrative work, this kind of granular detail isn't something that Congress can ignore and can just let the agency sort out. There are places that will require statutory fixes. So we're hoping we can kind of tap into that nascent interest in Congress.
For someone who's listening and might be on the fence about whether or not they should participate, what's your elevator pitch to get them over the line to say, yes, I want to tell you my story, and how should they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to start by just saying, thank you to all the federal employees who are departing the federal government right now. The value of that service is incredible, and the value of that expertise is also incredible. I don't think it's always clear to folks in the executive branch how much Congress is hungry for this information, that Congress wants the information that it needs to do a good job. It's just really hard to access. There are a lot of things that look obvious to folks in the executive branch that are absolutely mind-blowing over on the legislative branch. That divide is incredible. So for folks on the fence, we'd really say, no matter how small that insight is, again, if it's, hey, I couldn't get enough staplers for my department for whatever stupid procurement reason, that is important. That is really, really important. That is valuable. That is worthwhile. And we hope that, again, we can kind of do honor to those folks and do honor to their expertise, their years of service by getting those insights and putting them in the hands of folks who can do something about it.
Is there a deadline?
We are planning to keep this open until the end of the calendar year. We'd encourage folks to participate as soon as possible because we do want to start pulling together some kind of analytical products, first conclusions that we can start sharing with Congress. But there's plenty of opportunity if folks are on the deferred resignation, they don't cycle out of their formal employment till later this fall. We will still be open. We are here, happy to take those insights.
I've been speaking with Ann Meeker. She's Managing Director of the PopFox Foundation. Ann, thank you so much for sharing this great new program with us, and we hope people will join you.
Awesome, Terry. Thank you so much. We really appreciate a chance to talk about it.
We'll post this interview and a link to the Dialogues website at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.
What makes a great leader in government? Christine Harada joins WEPA CEO Shane Canfield to reflect on her journey from aerospace engineering to the White House. In this episode, she shares lessons on public-private collaboration, leading with purpose, and why service, not power, should guide leadership.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Today, I'm joined by Christine Harada, former Senior Advisor at the Office of Federal Procurement Policy within the Office of Management and Budget. Ms. Harada, welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
You spent portions of your career working in both the public and the private sector. And from your experience, what makes leadership in the federal sector different than the private sector?
At the highest level, leadership in the public sector is very fundamentally at its core mission-driven. Right? The work is in the service of the public good, and the goals and the programs are frequently long-term, they're systemic, and they're incredibly complex. And success, isn't necessarily measured by quarterly earnings. We don't have that kind of drumbeat, but certainly more by the lasting impact that we have on Americans' lives. What's also unique about public sector is, in my view, the profound sense of history that you feel. And I think certainly I was very aware about the work that I was doing and how it builds on the efforts of those who came before me, and that future generations of leaders also depend on the decisions that were being made today. And that, for me, certainly provided a greater weight of responsibility.
That's a wonderful answer. And I was in the private sector for much of my career, and now WEPA is a nonprofit, and I really relate to what you said about being mission-driven rather than profit-driven. You've got a long-term view, and always at the core of it is serving others.
Yes.
Is there a moment that stands out to you from early in your career that influenced your leadership style later on?
I started out my career as an aerospace engineer, building satellites in airplanes. And when I first entered the workforce, my organization at the time had 120 people. We were a large company, 120 people, 4 women, and I was the only woman of color. I was also the youngest throughout the entire organization. And so, I remember having an experience when I was doing some engineering work. We had a design review, and I had seen some issues with the flight software that I pointed out. At the time, they're like, maybe it's not really that big of a concern. I was like, but in my heart, I knew that the issue was real and stayed with it. And sure enough, a few weeks later, that topic came up again, and we addressed it. Turns out my concern did indeed prove to be valid. And so it's just one of those experiences that really sank into me around ensuring that I am listening to everybody, period, end of story, within the organization, really thinking through about how do we take into consideration opinions from all different spectra. As a third-generation Japanese American, right, I was raised to be humble, keep your head down, and work hard, etc. But at times, leadership also requires you to speak up, do so politely, with courage, etc. Even though you may be the only voice in your room, but certainly trust your voice. It also really helped shape my belief around diversity. DEI programs right now are viewed in a negative light. We're all mosaics, and they become better because you have those different experiences. And that's really stayed with me throughout the entirety of my career.
The diversity issue is a really big one coming from the insurance industry. That's an industry which is working on that. It's really a diversity of viewpoint and perspective and experiences that does influence your business. And more diverse employee bases absolutely helps. Was there a time in your federal career, perhaps when you were at OMB, that you faced what you consider a real challenge? And how did you overcome it?
One moment that really stands out in particular was when I was serving as the Federal Chief Sustainability Officer during the Obama administration. We had set, like many administrations, had set some really ambitious goals, very, very, very ambitious goals around how do we think about making the federal government's operations much more sustainable. But the challenge wasn't so much about the scale or the technical capacity of the organization. A lot of it was really centered around the funding. We overcame this largely by being very strategic, helping out with blocking and tackling with the variety of legal issues or legal questions that might have come up, like how do we address this? Certainly in the federal government, you're more often leading through influence as opposed to pure form authority, and that you really need to listen deeply, communicate clearly with folks, building out those coalitions and engaging with your stakeholders. And I know many folks in government speak like that, but that is the truth.
As someone who's spent time in both the federal and the private sectors, what makes the relationship between the two sectors important?
Certainly, it's an absolutely essential partnership, and I would add on to that like nonprofits or philanthropic organizations. As I mentioned before, I'm Japanese American, and in Japan there's a symbol for thunder, which looks like 3 arrows pointing around each other in a circular pattern, kind of to represent the swirl, if you will, of clouds. And that's kind of how I view the relationship between the government, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector. The government frequently sets the vision, the policy, the direction, but of course it's the private sector that brings the capital, the innovation, the skill set, the capabilities, et cetera, to be able to execute. Partnering with that, of course, are the nonprofits who may be supporting the surrounding society. Public-private collaboration is not just about contracts or compliance, but it's also about figuring out what's your shared purpose. That's when real transformation can and does actually happen.
In life insurance, there's a concept, lifetime value, where bringing a new insured in costs a lot more money than the amount of premium. And so when you talk to commercial carriers, it's a similar kind of thing. You need to bring them into the concept that they're going to be with us 20 years, and after 5 years, you can ride through that. But it's a concept that isn't easy for commercial businesses to understand. That's a partnership too. Very, very similar. What advice would you give to somebody aspiring to become a leader in government?
There are 3 things, right? So firstly, around leadership in government, you want to make sure that you're leading with purpose. You want to stay grounded in your values, and don't underestimate the power of relationships. Remember why you entered public service in the first place, and that'll help carry you through some of the inevitable challenges that you're going to face. Making sure that you are also investing in relationships. In government, you rarely have full control, and I think this is, in my view, more important in government than perhaps in the private sector. You are frequently leading through influence. You are collaborating with very different parties who frequently have very different agendas than you do. And so building that trust, investing in building that trust and planting those seeds earlier and along the way in your career, I think is absolutely critical. And certainly last but not least, I would say, don't feel that you have to have it all figured out on day one. Absolutely stay open to the unexpected. Say yes to the opportunities that stretch you, and know that you can lead from wherever you are. It's not just about position or hierarchy. It's about the impact that you can have.
What wonderful advice, especially in today's world, which is a little topsy-turvy. Who is one person, someone you know personally, or perhaps someone well-known, that's impacted your leadership style?
The leaders that particularly stand out for me are Colin Powell, a woman named Carla Harris, who was a managing director in investment banking, and then last but not least would be my father. Starting with perhaps the more famous one, Colin Powell. I read his biography, loved his perspectives and the rules of leadership that have been particularly influential for me, right? So get mad, then get over it. Share the credit. Perpetual optimism, a force multiplier, things of that nature. And hearing his story was certainly very inspirational for me. And so I certainly very much look up to him and as a role model. The second person that I mentioned is a woman named Carla Harris. She's an African-American woman, became a managing director at an investment bank in the 80s, at a time when there were not that many women of color in investment banking in New York. And so she's published a book called Her Pearls of Wisdom. It's one of her trademarks. She always wore a pearl necklace, and she has pearls of wisdom around how can you be authentic and build relationships to be successful in super challenging environments. And she had a lot of guidance on the importance of finding sponsors and mentors. And certainly last but not least, my father is really my why for I do a lot of the work that I do in the public sector. He started out life, like many other, immigrant kids in poverty. He was a strawberry farm laborer. Japanese Americans at the time were not allowed to own the land, so we worked the land. He grew up in that kind of environment. And I just think it's absolutely neat that someone who came really he was dirt poor, to say it, and his daughter ended up working in the White House twice. It's quite the American dream, and I would very much like to have that opportunity available for other people as well.
Well, wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Christine, thank you very much for your time today and all of these learnings. It's really good, impactful. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I'm Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Until next time on Lessons in Leadership.
Find the full podcast and future episodes of Lessons in Leadership on the Federal News Network app and anywhere you enjoy your podcasts.